You've been told a story about family favoritism. It goes like this. Parents sometimes have a favorite. It's unfair, maybe even a little hurtful, but ultimately harmless. Kids grow up, move on with their lives, and eventually it just stops mattering. That story is a myth. Favoritism, in its most severe form, isn't a preference at all. It's a system, two roles, assigned early, reinforced for years without anyone naming what was happening, engineered to serve one purpose that has almost nothing to do with either child actually involved in it. And the two people living inside that system usually don't fully understand what happened to them until decades later, often in completely different therapy offices, telling completely different versions of the exact same childhood. There's an architecture to this, a specific function each role is built to serve, and a reason both roles, despite looking like total opposites from the outside, end up carrying remarkably similar wounds underneath. This is how the system actually works. The function behind the system. Before the roles themselves, there's the underlying reason the roles exist at all. In the family system, built around one parent's fragile self-image, every member ends up assigned a function, whether or not anyone in the family consciously planned it that way. Someone has to serve as proof that the parent is good, successful, doing everything right as a person and as a parent. And someone has to absorb the blame for everything that goes wrong, so the parent never has to sit with that weight directly. These two functions get assigned to two children, not based on who they actually are as individuals, based on what the system happens to need at the moment the assignment is made, sometimes birth order, sometimes which child physically resembles the parent, sometimes simple, almost arbitrary chance. Once assigned, the roles calcify fast, often within just a few years, and from that point forward, almost everything that happens in the household quietly reinforces them, day after day, without anyone stepping back to question why. The golden child, the mirror. The golden child's function is to reflect something flattering back at the parent, continuously, on demand. Their achievements become the parent's achievements, narrated at every available opportunity. Their photo goes up first. Their accomplishments get recounted to relatives, to neighbors, to anyone within earshot who'll listen. This looks from the outside like the better deal by far. It rarely feels like one from the inside, because the love attached to this role arrives with a silent, unstated condition: performance. The golden child learns early, often before they can fully articulate it, that affection is contingent on continuing to reflect well. A failing grade, a setback, a vulnerable moment, a need that happens to be inconvenient at the time. These don't just go unsupported. They can get treated as a kind of betrayal, a glitch in a mirror that was only ever supposed to show one image, on command. So the golden child grows up fluent in performance and strangely illiterate in their own actual needs. Vulnerability was never safe to practice openly. Struggling was never modeled as something you could do out loud in front of anyone. Many golden children reach adulthood, high-achieving, externally impressive, admired by people who have no idea what it cost, and quietly unable to answer a simple question when finally asked it directly. What do you actually want, separate from what makes someone else look good? The scapegoat, the drain. The scapegoat's function is the inverse of this entirely. Whatever goes wrong in the household, tension, disappointment, the parent's own unexamined frustration about something unrelated, gets routed toward this child, regardless of actual cause or fault. The scapegoat often becomes, structurally and almost mechanically, the explanation offered for everything that's difficult in the family. Things were fine until they came along. They're just difficult, always have been. The role absorbs blame the way a drain absorbs water, not because the water actually originated there, but because the entire system was built to send it in that direction, every single time, regardless of where the problem genuinely started. What this produces, over years of repetition, is a specific and lasting wound, a chronic, often unconscious belief that something is fundamentally wrong with them as a person, located in identity rather than in any specific behavior. Scapegoats frequently describe adulthood as a quiet, ongoing effort to prove they aren't the problem. in relationships, at work, in entirely new rooms full of people who have never once accused them of anything at all. There's a complicated, often overlooked byproduct of this particular role too. Because the scapegoat exists structurally outside the family's flattering narrative about itself, they often end up seeing the actual dysfunction more clearly than anyone else inside the system. That clarity comes at an enormous personal cost, and it almost never gets acknowledged by the family as a form of perception worth respecting or even believing. Why the roles can flip and rarely stay fixed forever. Most people assume these two roles are permanent, assigned once in early childhood, then locked in place for good. They're not, and that fact changes how the whole dynamic should be understood. The roles are functional, not personal, which means they can rotate the moment the function needs them to. A golden child who finally stops performing, who sets a boundary, or makes a life choice the parent doesn't approve of, can be reassigned to scapegoat almost overnight, sometimes after years and years of being the clear favorite. The system itself never actually loved the specific person occupying the role. It only ever needed the role filled by whoever happened to be available and useful at the time. This single fact explains something that confuses a lot of adult children, looking back later at shifting family alliances over the years. The inconsistency they witnessed was never really about them, specifically as individuals. It was about which function the system happened to need, filled in that particular season of family life, where both roles arrive despite looking like total opposites. This is the part of the dynamic that tends to surprise people the most once they actually hear it laid out. Golden children and scapegoats appear on the surface to have lived through opposite childhoods entirely, one celebrated constantly, one blamed constantly. But clinicians who work extensively with adult survivors of these family systems consistently report the same underlying pattern, regardless of which role a given client occupied growing up. Both roles produce a remarkably similar core wound, simply wearing two very different costumes. Neither child was ever loved unconditionally, as themselves, separate from the function they happened to serve. The golden child was loved specifically for performing well. The scapegoat was blamed simply for existing at all. Neither experience, underneath the surface, involved the parent actually seeing the child as a distinct, separate person with their own needs, separate from whatever the family system currently required from them to keep functioning. This is exactly why so many adult siblings who occupied these two opposite roles describe arriving, years later, at remarkably similar adult struggles. Difficulty trusting that they're wanted without first proving something to earn it. Difficulty fully believing that love isn't conditional on continued performance or on continued practiced silence. Here's the architecture sitting underneath the entire dynamic. This was never really about two children, however different their lived experiences felt at the time. It was about one parent's unmet psychological need, distributed strategically across two roles, dressed up convincingly as two different personalities, two different fates, two different kids who simply happened to turn out differently from one another. Both roles exist, ultimately, in service of the exact same underlying function, protecting one adult's fragile self-image at the lasting cost of two children's relationship to their own sense of worth. If anything in this video felt uncomfortably close to your own family while you were watching, that recognition is worth taking seriously. Not as a verdict on anyone involved, but simply as information you didn't have a name for before. This video describes a general pattern. It isn't a diagnosis of any one specific family, including yours, based on a single video. If what you're recognizing here feels genuinely heavy, it's worth exploring further with a therapist who can actually look at your particular history with you directly. Because here's the question this channel always ends on. If the role you were given as a child was never really about you in the first place, how much of who you believe yourself to be today did you actually choose for yourself?